Hey, what's up? Andrew Kramer here for TubeTape.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at doing some color keying to create a scene like this. Okay, so here in After Effects, I have some raw footage of Tino running from a fake explosion, and we're going to be keying that out and replacing it with this alley background. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll go ahead and take our footage, drop it onto this new comp button, and a new comp gets created with all of the same settings as our raw footage. Now I'm also going to take our background layer and bring that to the bottom beneath our raw footage. Then we'll select our raw footage, we'll choose Effect, Keying, Key Light. Now, this is the effect we're going to be using to get rid of the green background. Now, you'll notice it's not perfectly lit. It's kind of got some bright spots and some shadow area, but that's okay. What we're going to do is use the screen color, click on this little eyedropper, and we're just going to click in here. And that will get rid of most of the green. Now, what we can do is we can turn up the screen gain, which will increase the intensity of the removal. So we turn that up, and then we get rid of a lot more of the spill. So I also want to play around with some of the settings as we look at the footage. So right here we have a lot of motion blur, and we can see that it's a little bit green right here. So we can take the screen balance and just start tweaking it until it kind of goes away. Now, the thing about screen balance is that these settings are all based on other settings. So if you change something, you may have to come back and change something else. So it's kind of a give and take process. Now, the main controls that we're going to be focusing on are in the screen matte control. So if we bring that up, then we have a few other settings here. So I'll disable our background, and we'll zoom in here. There's also a switch here that allows you to toggle the transparency so we can actually see what everything is looking like. So right here we can kind of see some spots and some holes. So we'll try to fill those up in the next few steps. So the first thing we'll do is we'll change the clip white amount. And what that does is fills in the darker areas. But I also want to go ahead and turn the screen blur to about 1. And what that does is allows the edges to look a little bit smoother. So if we shut that off to 0, you can see it's a little bit harsh, and if we turn that just to about 1, it smooths it out a little bit. Now we can also turn up the shrink amount, which will shrink or grow the edge, maybe -0.5 just to start with. And again, once we make changes, we may also want to change the screen balance just to get something that's a little bit more even. Now, the other consideration is what your shot is being composited over. So in this case, we are using somewhat of a darker background. So this is looking pretty good, and it only took a few steps. Now, the clip black is also helpful to get rid of some of the extra stuff that doesn't get keyed completely. So if we turn that up just a little bit, we'll be sure to get rid of any of the extra spill that may have been left over. So that's a pretty good basic key, and we'll go ahead and do a little bit of color correction to match our footage to our background. So we'll scroll up here, we can close the key light effect, and then we'll choose Effect, Color Correction, Hue and Saturation. So this way we can bring the saturation of the entire image down. So if we just bring that down, the image won't be as saturated. Then we'll choose Effect, Color Correction, Curves. And now let's try to match some of the green tones of our raw footage. There's a lot of red in this particular shot. So what we can do is go to the red channel and then pull some of the red out by bringing it down. So if we click and drag down, we can kind of get rid of the red and introduce a little bit of green. And that's getting pretty close. We also want to play with the contrast. So we'll go back to the RGB, and we'll click down on the bottom here and just bring it down. Now, the other thing to consider is that we're in sort of a dark alley sort of tunnel, and we want the entire image to be a little bit darker. So if we just take the top point here, bring it down, it will actually bring the entire brightness of the image, which will allow it to melt with it and blend with the original a lot better. So we can just play with that. Look at that face. That's an action face. So again, we'll add a little bit of contrast here. And I think that looks pretty good. One of the cool things about After Effects is that you can move the frame around. So if I just zoom out here, we're at 25%, I can just slide it over, and now it looks like he's looking down the hall or down the alley, and then he's running away and he jumps. So we're going to introduce a cool explosion, and we'll be using a kit called Action Essentials 2, and you can find that on TubeTape. What it is a collection of footage and elements that were shot with the purpose of compositing in your live action shots. So all of the elements are actually pre-keyed and very easy to use. So we're going to be using a few of the elements here, and we'll take a look at how we can composite them in this particular shot. So here I have a folder called Action Essentials 2, and I've chosen a few elements to use. Now the collection comes with 500 elements, but we're just going to be using a couple of them here. Now the first thing we have is a fireball at the camera. So we'll bring that down beneath the Tino footage but above our background. And if we line this up, we can slide it over here. Now the first thing you might notice is we didn't have to do any color keying. The footage automatically has a transparency in the background, so it composites right on top of your footage. So we can just line this up, time it so that it looks like he's running from an explosion, and there we go. Now we want to tweak a few settings so it blends with the scene a little bit better. So first, let's choose Effect, Color Correction, Hue and Saturation, and let's bring the saturation down a little bit. Then we'll choose Effect, Color Correction, Curves, and we'll turn this up just a bit. We want it to seem like a really bright, hot fire that's coming after him. Now, one of the other things that you may want to consider doing is playing with the transfer modes of your layers. So right now, if I just hide our top layer, our footage is set to normal, and F4 will toggle those switches. So we can change the transfer mode to screen or add, and these are similar to Photoshop transfer modes, and they'll just give you a different look when blending the elements. But for now, we'll just go ahead, leave it at normal, and that way it'll just use the settings that the clip has. So we'll go ahead, come back to the project. We have this dirt charge element. We'll bring that out, and that's basically this sort of small explosion with some debris and some bits. And we'll go ahead and stick it somewhere in the middle here. Now I want to go ahead and color correct it. So we'll bring out the color correction, go down to curves, and we'll just darken it just a bit here. Now we'll also introduce a little bit more green by pulling the red out somewhat. And maybe going down to the blue channel and turning that up also. So that looks pretty good. Now we do have a sharp edge at the bottom. So what we can do is we can come up here to the mask tool, the rectangle, draw a shape around the bottom of this element, and then we have a mask that shows up. We can set the mask to subtract, and now it's pulling out that part of the image. So we could do things like put it next to this door and maybe use the pen tool and draw a shape around the door and exclude this part from the composite. So if we choose subtract, then it'll somewhat look like that explosion is coming from inside of that doorway. So masks are a really powerful tool for, hiding parts of the image, and we can get into that another time. But for now, I want to go ahead and feather our mask. So we'll bring the mask control down. Here we have the mask feather. We'll turn that up just a little bit, and then we'll move this over. So this just helps it blend a little bit nicer, and again, we may just bring the overall brightness of the clip down so that it matches with our scene. So now we have a dirt charge followed by a large explosion, and we can time these elements together. Now another key thing to be thinking about with the Action Essential elements is the speed of the clips. So In this case, the dirt explosion is almost slow motion. So what we can do is change the speed by selecting the clip, come up here to layer, go to time, and we can choose time stretch. And we have this dialog that comes up, and the stretch factor works like this. If we set it to 200, the clip will be twice as long, so it'll actually go in slow motion. But if we set it to 50%, it'll be half the original speed, and it'll be a lot faster. So maybe we'll set it to 75 and hit OK. But it's good to use round numbers like 25, 50, 75. So we'll hit OK. So that goes off. We can trim the top of the clip. So I don't want to see that fire yet. So we can just come right here and shrink the end of the clip so that we just see the initial blast, and it's like, bam, it's on. So that looks good. Then we have the fireball that comes right after it. Maybe somebody left a briefcase bomb and it's blowing up. Who knows? I'll let you guys write the story. So we'll turn our footage back on, and it's looking pretty good. Now I want to add this big glow so it seems really bright. So we'll create a new adjustment layer. An adjustment layer is kind of a layer that applies all of the settings to everything that's beneath it. So if I were to add a color correction, it would color correct all of my layers. In this case, I'm going to choose Effect, Stylize, and it may be off my screen, but we're looking for glow. So here we have the glow effect. We have the radius and the intensity. So if we come about right here, we can turn the radius up, and we just add this really big, powerful glow. Now it's looking a bit yellow, so let's change the colors to something a little bit more neutral. So maybe something tan and maybe something a little bit more reddish. And then instead of using the original colors, we're going to use the A/B colors from below here. So that's looking a little bit better. We can turn up the intensity of the glow here, and it's really starting to blend our scene. So he's running away and he jumps, and it's looking good. Now, other fun things you can do is maybe duplicate our fire. So we could choose Edit, Duplicate. We could offset the time of it and maybe scale it up and change the transfer mode to Add, which is going to be really bright. And we can maybe move it down. But I'm basically just adding more layers just to try to make this a little bit more exciting and a little bit more dangerous, I guess. Now, another important tip is changing the length of your composition. So we can do that by coming up here to Composition, Comp Settings, and here we have a bunch of different settings. We can change the duration, which is currently at frames for me, but it may be seconds for you. So you can just change it to maybe 300 or 10 seconds, and we'll hit OK. And then if we pull out, so we can hit this button here, and maybe extend our background over, and then our explosion will kind of go away, and we have some empty time. Now, another element I used was this big dust blast, which is really cool. We put that in here, time it up, and it just gives all of the explosion, another layer of sort of dust in the room. Maybe put it beneath. We can even lower the opacity by hitting T, or just come down here to the transform settings and turning the opacity down to about 50%. So that way we just see a little bit of smoke after this massive explosion. Now, if you want to play it back while you're working on it, we need to render it into the RAM preview. So we have our RAM preview controls here. I like to change the resolution to half and sometimes skip one frame, and it just makes it go a little bit faster. But if you click on this far button, this will start the RAM preview, or you can just hit 0 on the number keypad. Now you can wait for it to finish rendering, or just tap 0 for it to start playing back. And then we can see it in real time. Once we get it the way we want, we can trim the comp. So if we take this, slide it over, right click, choose Trim Comp to Work Area. And so now we just have this region selected. So I can render this out for maybe my editing application, And we can do that by choosing Composition, Add to Render Queue. And the render queue is where everything gets rendered from. So normally I want to have it set at best. And then we'll change the output module. We can click here. I like to use QuickTime. And we can go into the format. And I also like to use Photo JPEG at about 95% or so. We can hit OK. If we have audio, we can include the audio. Otherwise, we can just leave it off and do the audio later. We can hit OK. Set the output destination. So if we click here, we can just name the file, click Save, and then just click the render button, and our scene will get rendered out, and that QuickTime movie can then be imported into your editing application or, shown to your friends, all that good stuff. Now, you can check out my site at videocopilot.net for some more advanced tutorials, and I hope this helps you out. My name is Andrew Kramer, and we'll see you next time.